This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it's time for Avoid the Maze. You are special. Now, as many of you know, we have two shows called Avoid the Maze. One is Avoid the Maze, Your Journey Through Life, which I'm going to have Rahz tell us a little bit about his journey. But his topic is because you are special. He offers empowerment to parents and teens. And you know what? As parents, when our child is born, we don't get a manual that tells us how to take care of them for the next, well, let's see, I have two boys. One's 34, one's going to be 50, and I still do some parenting along the way. I know they don't necessarily appreciate it, but we're not told when to stop parenting because that's our title. So, Rahz, give us a little bit of background. Tell us who you are and what got you into this field, because it's not an easy field to be working in.
First podcast, I really do appreciate it, having an opportunity to share and just to connect with people who may be going on their own journey. My story is a little unique in the sense that I grew up without a father, with a mother who was addicted to drugs, cocaine, and I lived with my grandmother from 13 till she passed away in 2014. And the reason I say that this context is that I didn't have a father or a role model. And I realized that early on in my life, I was always seeking love from others that were kind of modeling and could lead me and to share with me how to be a man, what success looked like, what the things and values and beliefs I needed. And then I started a business and I started doing well in the fitness world and the coaching world. But then COVID happened. And I got to kind of take a step back and ask myself, what do I really want? What type of impact do I want to make on this world? And where is my superpower needed? And it just called, said, you know what, parents and teens are going to be struggling. And you've been coaching a special population for so long. You have your own story of growing up with my right leg is shorter than the other. I was labeled disabled from the day I was born. And out of nowhere, I said, I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to empowering students, empowering parents so that they can have the best versions of themselves and have the best relationship. And that's where this coaching business began. And it's where it is today. And I love every minute of it.
Well, I have to tell you, I dislike the word disabled because we all have abilities.
Mm-hmm.
My son wasn't diagnosed on the autism spectrum till he was 6 years old. So he went to school one day. He was neurotypical. Something happened in class. They called in the school psychologist. Next thing we were told is you need to take him to a doctor. You need to have him diagnosed. Do not come back to school until you have a diagnosis. So it took us almost a week. So he stayed out of school a week. We got him in, and the doctor gave us a diagnosis of, at that time, Asperger's, which was a form of autism. Now, the doctor never used the word disabled. However, the nurses, his psychologist, his teachers, and the community all talked about his disability.
Mm-hmm.
And he, at the age of 6, fought that word.
Mm-hmm.
He'd say, I can do this. I can do this. And they'd look at him and go, no, you don't have to do those things. So to my listeners out there, if we can start erasing the word disabled and also the R word, which so many people like to use, and I think it's horrible. Let's just talk about what abilities we have. And obviously, Rahz, you have a lot of abilities because you're coaching. Like, you can't tell me that you have a disability. You are coaching. You have an ability. So your coaching came out of the fact, if I heard you right, that you really didn't have a role model. Obviously, you had a loving grandmother because you said nothing derogatory in that area, which is absolutely wonderful. And you're lucky that you had her. Okay. But you obviously realized that you were missing something when you were growing up. So, about what age did you start to notice that?
Wow, great question. And I agree with you. I don't like the word disability. I share it because my disability turned into my abilities to be and do and become who I am today.
Right.
So I agree with you 1,000%. I learned very early. I mean, we as you said, your son at 6 years old, we start to look around and we see what the world is presenting to us. And I saw little boys throwing baseball with their fathers. I saw people coming to bring your dad to school or bring your mom to school, and I didn't have that opportunity. So I started to feel instantly a little bit of a lack inside of myself, and I didn't feel normal. And like, you said, I had doctors telling me my entire life since I was born that I wasn't normal. I wasn't going to be like the other kids. I had several doctors tell me I'd be in a wheelchair by the time I'm 18 and I'd never be able to play sports like the other kids. So I developed a growth mindset out of the trauma and the or the limiting beliefs that others were trying to impose upon me. And so I can't, when I think back to it, it was early on, probably around 12, when I had my second surgery on my leg, which is called the Alizaroff, and it's rings with several pins and a crank, which was designed to lengthen my knee at first and then straighten it. And after that surgery, 6 months being in the hospital alone, I came out of that surgery and I thought the doctors looked all proud and they looked all happy and like, oh my God, you're healed. It was a success. And I looked at him and I said, I have a straight leg now, but how is that leg going to stay straight? And they just said, oh, well, you're going to have to wear a brace the rest of your life. And even at 12, I understood. I didn't know what I know now about anatomy, physiology, biomechanics, but I can tell you that I understood that brace was not normal. And I wasn't home for 2 weeks to visit my grandmother. And she had inspired me from that moment that God made me the way I am. And I didn't need to change anything ever again. And I've never had another surgery on my right leg again, which is 3.5 inches different than the left.
So, one of the things that I find very interesting is when we're born, none of us are perfect. We assume we're perfect if mom and dad count 10 fingers, 10 toes, certain features of us, if they look right, hey, you're normal. But we don't know what's going to happen between the moment of birth being normal and as we continue on in life. And one example I will give you, in I guess I'm 74 now, so I probably was right around 62. I had to have tubes in my ears since the time my son had been born when I was 40 years old. And every couple months, I'd go back to the doctor. He'd clean out the tubes. He'd put new tubes in. This went on for almost 20 years. All of a sudden, the tubes were not working. And I had a growth in my left ear. So that had to be taken out. And I lost a good part of my hearing. And it also affected my right ear. So now all of a sudden I'm wearing hearing aids. But I wasn't ready to be an old person wearing hearing aids. So I made sure my hair covered my ears. I didn't really tell anybody until one day I saw a young child wearing hearing aids. And I became proud. I started telling everybody. So when I was born, I had perfect hearing. I had perfect hearing up until I was 60 years old. It had nothing to do with my age. It had to do with I developed a tumor. Okay. So my abilities changed with wearing the hearing aids. Some people would still say, you're disabled. You have lack of hearing. Well, I have a different kind of hearing. The same way you have a different gait when you walk. We don't have to all be perfect. So now you know the difference. You come out of surgery, your grandmother reinforces you are just as good as you're going to be, and that's wonderful. What's it like with your peers?
Mhm.
They look at you as being a whole person.
Absolutely. I mean, I was blessed to, experience a decent upbringing. And I say decent because we all have it's our perception. There was some bullying and there was some mean kids. There was going through that process. But through that journey, I really learned to cultivate my own strengths and to really embrace them and to surround trying to push me down. So I had a great adolescent life, I say, going to high school, my early on college years. And then it led me to my career, which again, it was someone's limiting beliefs. And I share these stories because I don't know who the listeners are, but everyone has some limiting belief
Oh,
about
yeah.
themselves. And if we allow those to become and manifest into who we believe we are, then we allow that person to win. And, I wanted to be a personal trainer and becoming a had to be 6'2", blonde hair, blue eyes, and those were the jobs that's the position. Well, I'm not. I'm 5'3". I limp and I have a big smile. And so that was who I was. And luckily I pushed myself through that door, got that first job. And it allowed me to go on to start to inspire and motivate people. And I got to work with all kinds of different populations and cultivate the ability to communicate, connect, and really build rapport and inspire people through fitness. And that was what I got to do from really 2000 to 2020 for 20 years until I changed over and started focusing primarily on working with parents and teens.
Well, and I have to tell you, I think I'd rather have you as my inspirational coach in physically getting better, whatever that is, whether it's exercising or whatever, rather than that tall, muscular, blonde person who looks like the perfect specimen. Because I tend to, and I say this to all my clients that I coach, I'm not a perfect person and I don't aspire to be perfect, but I want to be the best that I can be. And if I can see you being the best that you are, that's more inspiration to me than somebody who maybe just fits the bill. And I'm glad you pointed out, tall, lean, blonde. My 34-year-old son tells me that the reason he's not meeting the women that he would like to meet, he doesn't have the perfect body build. And I laugh at that because I'll say to him, just go out on the street and watch other couples. Not all those guys have perfect body build. So maybe somebody initially is looking for that, but the reality of it is we don't end up with that. And there's a good reason for it. So for 20 years, you worked in one field. Now you're working with parents and kids. Tell me what that is like, because there are so many parents out there who need the coaching. So give us a back.
So yeah, I mean, it really came down to reflecting back. Everything in my life comes back to a reflection. I seek the higher source of energy to bring forth the inspiration. And the day that New York shut down the gyms was March 20th, 2020. And I remember that day like it was yesterday,
Yep.
because my identity changed for so many others did as well. And I sat down and said, what's going to be next for me? And my wife was sitting there with me and we talked for a little bit. And then I just went for a walk and I got inspired to write a book. And the book was called Student Success Secrets: Unlock the 7 Secrets for Developing Inspired, Motivated, Success-Driven Teens. And the inspiration behind that, again, was I didn't know what success was when I was 12, 13. It changes, but I didn't even have anything to actually refer back to. So I wanted to provide students and parents a guide to crack that code so that they could have the clarity, the communication, and understand how they can install it in their own lives. And by the book, people started saying, and I'd always coached, I mean, whether they were athletes and I was always like, it wasn't about fitness for me. Fitness was a
Right.
vehicle. It was really about the mindset, the 6 inches between our ears, which dictates our success or failure in life. And people were like, oh, can you work with my son? Can you work with my daughter? Can you help me understand these modern teenagers? There's so much confusion. They're on their phones all day. They have tablets. What do I do? They say I don't understand. And I was blessed to have an ability to connect with teens. And we started to talk and I started to learn about them. And I started to share with the parents and using some of the frameworks and the strategies and tools that I'm sure you have as well in your toolbox, right? As a coach,
Right.
we have these resources and they started getting results. Parents are like, wow, you know what? I'm connecting with my son like I've never connected with before. My daughter is actually sharing with me her feelings and her emotions. I actually have tools now to help with some of the anxiety that my kids are telling me they're going through, the overwhelm, the study habit challenges, the executive functioning challenges. And we just put it together into a program so that we can actually just allow parents and teens to finally thrive in what I call the big three: school, sports, and life.
So as I'm listening to you, I think about my two sons. My oldest son moved away when he was 11 years old to live with his dad. Um, we had a rocky relationship, but we still stayed connected. That relationship became strong as he became a young adult. Um, my youngest son, there's a 15-year gap between the two of them. When my youngest son was born, I mean, he was my whole world at that time. His brother had been away for so long. Um, but once he got diagnosed, everybody wanted us to treat him a certain way. And I wanted to treat him as typical as possible. I didn't want to, if he did something wrong, he was going to get reprimanded for it, but he was going to have to learn the difference. And maybe sometimes it was difficult for him. But we didn't really have a connection in our relationship until he started going to the college where I was working. And at first he thought I was looking over his shoulder. And he finally found out I wasn't. I finally said to him, look, you can go to school here for free. You won't have any bills when you graduate. So think of that as a positive. If you choose to go someplace else, make the grades you need to here, you can transfer somewhere else. I said, but I need you to be responsible for your own education. And every once in a while, I'd hear that he was messing up along the way. And my question to him wasn't, you're messing up. My question always was, what's going on right now? What do you need to do? What kind of assistance do you need? And usually, as soon as I said that, he did not want the assistance. He'd jump right in, he'd do the work. But when he was in high school, it was different. I was really the parent. And if I heard he was behind, it was, come on, we're going to sit down, we're going to get it done right now. And he'd kick and scream doing it. He was always a good student, but he didn't want me to tell him what to do and when to do it. And I think that's what we're seeing in a lot of the youth today. Some that I blame on the parents. We're busy. We're not there. We're not, and they know what they can get away with.
Mm-hmm.
And many of them, if I'm not mistaken, think I can get away with it now because I'll eventually do it. Sometimes you don't realize that eventually could be a little bit too late. So how do you talk to both parent and teen? I talk to parents. I don't talk to teens. How can you talk to both at the same time?
Absolutely. Well, I have to first get them to understand that they have to meet each other where they are. And the way I do that is I have something called personality parenting. And so we don't parent the kid we wish we had. We parent the kid that we have. And by doing that, if you have more than one child and you're a listener, you know that they have different personalities, they have different strengths, they have different limitations, wants, needs. But if we parent through one filter, what happens is these kids start to feel, oh, resentful. You don't understand me. We're not connecting. I say this, you say that. And then what happens is a parent tries to use force, not flow. So I have to instill in my parents, hey, we have to be calm, we have to be cool, and we have to be collective. I give them some strategies on dealing with some of the things that they're challenges and going through right at that moment. Maybe it's defiance, maybe it's tonality and talking back. Then when I'm working with a teen, I say, hey, what's going on? What's the biggest challenge? What's your mom always pressuring you about? Let's talk about that. What if I were able to give you one or two strategies so the next time you were experiencing that, you'd know how to react or, excuse me, you respond, not they're like, yeah, me, what's the secret? And you give them a tip, you give them a tool, and now they're like, wow, that worked. You know what? Mom and dad didn't yell at me because I told them exactly what I was feeling in that moment. You shared with me exactly how, through our role playing, how to articulate that in a way that they understood. And I didn't raise my voice, they didn't raise their voice. It was a wonderful evening at dinner tonight. And when I get that type of feedback from working with a family, that is where I can build. Because once we have clarity, then we can communicate. But when we don't have clarity about who each other are, then we're going to struggle because whether it's the parent thinking the kid is doing wrong or the student thinking the parent is being overbearing, too or in my business, or just pushy, right? We have the helicopter, then we're dealing with lack of clarity. And that's the number one way that we work with kids and their parents initially, understanding personality.
It's funny that you use the word helicopter because my son used to call me the helicopter mom. And yet he has admitted that I really wasn't. But he would say it to me, and I would look at him like he was crazy, like, no. And he'd go, oh, yes, you are. And when he moved away 2 years ago to Texas, where he's working in his career field, as he was driving away, he says, Mom, you're really going to miss me. It's going to be empty nest syndrome. And yes, Mom was crying her eyes out as he drove away. But within about 24 hours, Mom started getting used to him being away as he got used to being away. And so I've teased him that, yes, I do miss you. But at the same time, I got to grow with you moving away, just as you got to grow. And I think that's something that parents don't understand as their kids get older, that them moving away is not them being mean and nasty to you. It's part of the cycle. They need to move on, and you need to move on as well. So what do you tell those parents who have been struggling with their teen for years and years? Now they're getting along, and now the teen is old enough to move out, and mom and dad feel, uh-oh, can't handle this.
Great question. Yeah, a lot. When I'm working with, I do something called embedded commands. So I start to presuppose this is going to happen well before it happens. If I'm working with a freshman in ninth grade or a junior getting ready for the SATs and getting ready for college and next level, we kind of start to have that conversation so that they know this is going to happen. And I always share a story that I learned a long time ago from one of my mentors. And he was telling us a story about the astronauts when they first made their first voyage to the moon. And these guys were excited and they got to do something that they always wanted to do. But they didn't have their next mission. So a lot of them came back, returned, and they were on very low senses. They didn't know what would I do? I've already reached the pinnacle. So with parenting, I always want my parents to have a goal. I always want them to have something to look forward to. I was talking to a parent this morning. She's going back to school for her PhD, something that she always wanted. Now, she didn't know she was hiring me as a life coach, but we wound up going that route because I want to make sure that she's whole, because your kids are going to model the behavior that you have. So if you're showing anxiety, if you're showing being overwhelmed, if you show that you react and don't respond to life's challenges, then they're going to do the same. So you want your kids to be empowered. And by being empowered, you must lead from the front. That's one of the first principles that I share with parents, and helping them understand, hey, this is what it's about as a parent. You know this. Once they leave that nest, now all the work you've done, you get to watch it and see how much they took from you. And then you still get to sprinkle, because like you said, you're always a parent.
Right.
My boys are away at college right now, and I'm not going to stop paying attention to what they're doing, asking them questions. But our relationship changes slightly because they're going on. They have girlfriends, they have things going on in their lives. And as a parent, we have to be proud of those moments.
Well, and it's interesting because the first year that my son moved away, 6 months after he was all settled and everything was going great, he called me up one night and he said, I'm in a lot of pain. I said, what kind of pain? He said, it's in my chest. And I said, oh, you better call 911 because that's the first reaction I have, And he goes, no, I don't think it's like that. I think it's indigestion. Well, to make a long story short, he suffered all night, but he made me stay on the phone. And I said, why? Now, long distance, I have my phone plugged in. And I said, what am I going to do for you? And he goes, you'll just be there. Every once in a while, I'm going to ask you to talk to me. Well, as it turns out, the next morning, he was still suffering. And he called 911. And he went to the hospital. He had emergency surgery. He had a gallbladder that was about to explode. My first reaction as a mother was I wanted to yell at him for not calling sooner. But instead, all I said was, I'm getting on a plane. I'll be down there, because I knew he couldn't take care of himself when he got home. And when we got down there, I didn't do what my mother would have done to me. But if you would have only listened to me, it may not have been an emergency, whatever. It was, I'm glad you're okay. Now we know what to look for. And I said, and I will be here for you as long as the doctor says you need me. Not as long as he was going to say, and not as long as I was going to say. It was up to the doctor to tell us. And the doctor basically said within 5 to 7 days, he should be able to move around on his own, get his own food, whatever. And so at day 6, I went home. Now, if you would have told me that years ago, I would have said, never going to happen. I'm going to stay for months taking care of him. But you're right. At some point, we have to understand they have their own life. They have to deal with these things on their own. So I'm sure your sons feel very glad to know that, hey, Dad is watching, but Dad's not interfering.
Absolutely, 100%. It's the part of, we want them to be emotionally resilient. We want them to have this growth mindset. But so often what I see, especially navigating the modern teen, is that we don't give them that ability. And it reminds me of a story from, an eagle, how it teaches its young eagle how to fly. The eagle gets on the back, they go up really high, and boom, drops the eagle. And the eagle has to learn to flap its wings. Now, the mother eagle is never going to let the baby eagle hit the ground, but the eagle doesn't know how to fly yet. So she has to swoop under and pick him up right before he crashes. But they do that over and over. And eventually the eagle learns how to fly. We as parents have to learn how to let our children fly. They got to fall down, scrape their knees. They got to learn how to wipe it off and get back up. Too often I see, especially some of the parents that I get to work with, they're not doing that. They're rushing in. My son needs a better teacher. My son said that this is going on. They're bullying my son, and they're disempowering him, not empowering him. And one of the reasons that I feel like I've been so resilient in my life is that my grandmother, she had a second-grade education. She did not read or write. So she didn't have the ability to just, oh, you know what? I'm going to go and advocate for you. But she gave me what she knew, her own wisdom. Hey, you know what? You got to toughen up. You got to go out there. You got to learn. You got to adapt. You got to evolve into the best person you can. And she passed down strong values and strong beliefs within me.
Well, and those sometimes are as important, if not more so, than the actual education, because they're great influences as we get older. So how do you find your clients, or how do your clients find you?
So I would say probably most of my clients find me on social media, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. And then I do a lot of speaking. So when I'm out in schools and different events and things like that, we connect. A lot of parents call me because they don't even know that they need a coach or that they even exist. They're just kind of like, this is a new topic,
Yep.
but it's not therapy, it's coaching. So as a coach, I can assist you in giving you the X's and O's, the plays to run at home so that you can have a harmony at home and not so much conflict, and we can have more connection.
And sadly, so many of us think that when we're having this disconnect with our children, that we need therapy. And there's nothing wrong with therapy. Therapy is right in many cases. Once I started understanding coaching, and I started working with 2 coaches of my own, and then decided to become a coach, I realized there were so many things that we could have done differently as my son was growing up. And I wanted to make sure that if nothing else, I was there for the parents who said, I'm all alone, because you're not all alone. And there is help out there. And it doesn't mean that mom or dad, you're crazy or you've got the wrong values. It just might mean that you don't have the right tools. And listening is an important tool. I am so grateful that when my son now calls and he's complaining about something, I just sit there. I just let him go on and on and on. And unless he says, like, aren't you going to comment? I don't. And when he says, are you going to comment? My comment usually is, well, what do you think you can do differently? Mm. And usually it's like, well, this is what I can do. And he'll go on his tirade again. It is such a difference because he now figures out his own problems. And I don't have to carry them on my shoulders other than maybe for the 10 or 15 minutes he's bombarding me on the phone, because as soon as I get off, I know he's okay. One instance was where he's living in Texas. His apartment complex keeps turning off the water for whatever reason. They've had problems. And so yesterday at 11 o'clock in the morning, I was just getting off a call and he calls. And again, it was like, we're not going to have any water today. I don't know if I'm going to have water when I get home. And he just went on and on. And it's like he needed to vent. Mm-hmm. And I let him vent. And when he was done, he said, well, I guess if I don't have any water, I could stay at work a little later today. Okay, you figured it out. He called me this morning. He goes, when I got home, the water was turned on. Okay, we made it. But if you don't have the right tools, you're going to start bombarding that person with questions, with ways they should do things, and then you're going to get the resentment. So, Rahz, how can my listeners find you so we can follow you and read your books and everything else that you have to offer?
Thank you so much, Karen. The best place, theunstoppableteenager.com, is my website and my blog. You can go there. We have tons of free content. We post videos every week there on just parenting tips, strategies, so that you can have the best connection with your child. And on social media, it's at Rahz Slaughter, Rahz, last name Slaughter, just like the house.
Well, we'll have all that in the show notes, so there's no reason why anybody can't find you. Worst case scenario, everybody, just write me at newclevelandradio@gmail.com and I will connect you with Rahz. And I want to thank you so much. Just have a beautiful day.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Have a blessed day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.